Projecting arrogant hostility, Ilhan Omar locked her eyes onto JD Vance, aiming to execute what she believed would be a fatal political blow. She remained entirely unaware of the brutal 10-second lesson prepared to destroy her public image. Within the heavily secured wood-paneled walls of the United States Senate, the tension had abruptly reached a boiling point. This meeting was intended to be a carefully orchestrated bipartisan session regarding immigration rules, an uncommon yet official governmental gathering, not a public slaughter. The visual difference within the massive room was striking. Elevated above the sprawling stone ground, Vice President JD Vance sat flawlessly still in the presiding officer's seat, demonstrating the icy, unwavering restraint of a man compelled by centuries of institutional custom to stay completely quiet and totally unseen amidst the partisan warfare occurring beneath him. However, illuminated by the harsh, glaring lights of half a dozen high-definition C-SPAN broadcast cameras, Ilhan Omar had not arrived to give a courteous legislative update. She was there to inflict damage. Positioned behind the heavy wooden lectern with the frightening, deliberate motionlessness of a hunter trapping its victim, her body language was entirely weaponized. Her hijab was perfectly draped, her stance was fiercely upright, and her jaw was set at that notorious, stubborn angle of rebellion, the precise, haughty tilt that had previously withstood death threats, aggressive media interviews, and congressional reprimands. Her tone, reverberating with a rehearsed cadence through the room's advanced audio system, was supposed to convey the Progressive Caucus's position, but in a fleeting instant, she violently shredded the unspoken rules of the Capitol. Forsaking her prepared remarks completely, she suddenly turned her whole frame away from the microphones, fiercely aiming her back at the Legislative Assembly itself to align her shoulders directly facing the raised platform. She fixed her vision on Vance with the terrifying exactness of a marksman's crosshairs, clutched the thick timber of the stand until her knuckles turned bone white, and attacked. Vice President Vance, she spat, weapon on thing to dull, crushing absolute nature of a veteran prosecutor sending a convict to the executioner. The physical reaction inside the chamber was immediate and brutal. Lawmakers who had been casually scrolling on their mobile devices jerked their heads upward in pure shock, and whispering staff members stopped breathing, the color literally draining from their cheeks. The institutional rules for speaking within the Senate are carved in permanent stone. A person addresses the floor, uses the formal designation, and absolutely never gazes upward at the presiding official, calls him by his last name, and allows pure, undiluted malice to ooze from every single letter and word. You act as the ultimate symbol of pulling up the ladder, Omar's voice rang out, bearing the weaponized rhythm of countless speeches given on the House floor. Every pulse was meticulously planned to be sliced into an 8-second audio clip during the nightly broadcasts. You broke out of destitution, congratulations, and your initial move was to slam the door against every solitary refugee, every migrant, every individual striving to achieve exactly what you attained. She seized the perimeters of the lectern with both hands, the timber digging into her flesh. She held it tightly as the strain caused her joints to pale, and jutting knuckles broadcasted absolute determination to the 6 high-definition C-SPAN lenses. You authored a memoir about the American dream, she went on, her volume swelling. A massive success. It brought you fame, made you wealthy. Then you secured authority and ensured it became more difficult for anyone else to experience this dream. You are an imposter in a tailored suit, Mr. Vice President. A man who profited from every social safety net in the nation and later cast votes to slash them completely. She halted, letting the charge hang in the air. The Congressional hall plunged into the oppressive quiet of 100 influential individuals who recognized a boundary was on the verge of being shattered. And let us speak truthfully about what you truly are, she pressed onward. You did not elevate yourself by your own sheer grit. You wed into Yale. You accepted Peter Thiel's funds. You submit to a commander-in-chief who labeled your demographic hillbillies before requiring their ballots. She allowed that repulsive term to linger heavily. You are no defender of the blue-collar citizens. You are a stage prop, a stage prop carrying a pitiful origin narrative. The room breathed out a shared gasp. Raised upon the platform, JD Vance remained flawlessly motionless. This was not the stiff paralysis of a shocked elected official, neither the strained quiet of a man formulating a comeback. This was the deep guarded tranquility of a guy from Middletown, Ohio, who had suffered significantly worse verbal assaults by his own mother during her darkest evenings. Evenings when the prescription medication ran perilously low, the insults grew incredibly fierce, and a frightened 13-year-old adolescent discovered that the most vocal individual in the space is almost never the most powerful. He refused to shift his mass in his leather seat. He declined to fix his tie. He merely stared down at Omar, carrying a look that C-SPAN Camera 3 recorded with crushing clarity. It displayed neither rage nor disdain. It showed absolute recognition, the silent, exhausted comprehension of a male who had witnessed this exact emotional manipulation 1,000 times previously, the victim maneuver. The resentful story dictating that the solely genuine, impoverished person is the one who never succeeds in escaping their squalor. He waited calmly until she had entirely concluded her remarks, and then he purposely delayed 3 additional seconds. Hurrying a response is the anxious tendency of individuals who lack faith in their own vocabulary. Vance believed in his words completely, employing the very same unwavering conviction he instilled in the United States Armed Forces members who had drilled him. Gradually, the vice president angled his torso toward the audio receiver. His tone emerged surprisingly soft. It was a distinctly Midwestern composure, the sort of resonance that never tries to shout over loud turmoil, but succeeds in slicing straight through it, akin to how a surgical scalpel needs no screaming to cut profoundly. "I thank you, Congresswoman Omar," he commenced. "I honor the fervor." He paused, locking his gaze with hers. "I wish to recount a tale to you. Actually, I would rather present 2 tales, my own and yours, because I believe when we position them side by side, something fascinating occurs." He inclined slightly. "I was raised in Middletown, Ohio," Vance stated, and the manner in which he articulated the town carried the auditory gravity of a male speaking about the fundamental building blocks he was forged from. Population 48,000 and declining. Once a steel municipality, by the time I was maturing, it had morphed into a pharmaceutical hub. He severed eye contact from Omar, gazing forward over the expanse of the legislative chamber. "My mother was dependent on narcotics, not in the theoretical manner folks employ that term in sanitized official documents. She was addicted in the sense that means a 13-year-old lad returns from junior high, discovers her passed out on the restroom tiles, and must swiftly choose whether to summon emergency services or manage it independently. Because the previous time he phoned 911, she refused to converse with him for several weeks. The parliamentary hall, recently vibrating with the force of Omar's offensive, turned chillingly silent. I intend to be truthful as I penned a memoir about this, so it remains no mystery. I lived in a dwelling where there were a greater number of amber prescription containers than meals in the fridge, where the power was turned off 3 distinct times within a single 12-month period. Where my mother entertained, I stopped tracking 14 romantic partners across 4 years, and every single man was merely a marginally altered variant of the exact same catastrophe. Vance's massive palms rested flat and open on the timber desk. They were not clenching. They were the profoundly unstrained hands of a guy who had decades ago forged enduring resolution regarding his traumatic past. And subsequently, my grandmother, Mama, she welcomed me into her home. She was 60 years of age. She puffed cigarettes like a furnace. She stashed a loaded .38 caliber revolver beneath her sleeping pad, and she rescued my existence. She declined to rescue it via a federal initiative. She refused to rescue it with a regular monthly stipend. She rescued it by glancing at me every solitary morning and declaring, "JD, you are not trash. Do not you ever permit anyone to claim that you are that." He halted, his focus lowering to his hands for a brief moment before elevating once more. "This nation provided me precisely that. Provided me exactly mama. provided me precisely a dingy enlistment center in Middletown where a hardened Marine non-commissioned officer peered at a shattered teenager from a drug den and declared, "You will suffice." This nation gave me precisely the GI Bill, gave me precisely Ohio State, gave me precisely Yale Law Academy, where indeed, Congresswoman, I encountered my gorgeous spouse. And finally, this nation provided me precisely this seat. He shifted his attention back down toward Omar. His demeanor seemed non-hostile. It was unsettlingly tranquil. Now, permit me to recount your tale, because it is an intriguing tale as well. He leaned forward. You were birthed in Mogadishu, 1982. Domestic conflict erupted when you were a mere 8 years of age. Your relatives escaped, unresettled, escaped completely. The sort of terrifying evacuation where you depart carrying solely what you can physically tote, and you decline to glance back, because looking back entails witnessing the unspeakable horrors you fervently desire your offspring to never observe. He discussed her horrific history with a precise detail that stunned the room. He was not attacking her. He was handling her background narrative with the exact same solemn reverence with which he handled his own. You endured 4 exhausting years inside a refugee settlement situated in Kenya. Dadaab, provided my memory serves me, 90,000 terrified souls, 0 piped water, 1 lone physician for every 20,000 residents. You were a blameless youth. You did not select any of this. No youngsters choose a refugee settlement exactly like no youngsters choose a narcotic den. The juxtaposition hung in the space silent, yet overwhelmingly dense, a pair of traumatized youths, a pair of distinct terrors, and the exact same nation waiting near the conclusion for both. During 1995, the United States of America, this nation, the very entity you recently vociferously charged me with operating against, accepted your relatives as refugees. Out of all independent countries on the surface of the globe, this entity replied affirmatively, positioned you in Arlington, Virginia, subsequently Minneapolis, granted you full citizenship, granted you public education, granted you the sacred privilege to cast a ballot, granted you the privilege to campaign for federal office. And you triumphed twice. You journeyed from a miserable displacement camp in Kenya to the United States Congress. He allowed that massive reality to linger. He permitted the sheer unlikelihood of this trajectory to hang heavily inside the hall, the precise way his own route from a narcotic house to the vice presidential chair had lingered just moments prior. 2 impossible journeys, the exact same contour. Congresswoman Omar, this nation granted the 2 of us absolutely everything, not a flawless everything, not an effortless everything. It was the sort of everything that arrives heavily burdened by struggle, grief, and bleak periods. However, it constituted everything. The issue is not what this nation granted us. The genuine issue is what we gave back. Omar's mouth opened marginally. She parted her lips, the preliminary bodily impulse of a fierce counter-argument forming on her tongue. But Vance was not done. And the legislative chamber intuitively sensed he was not done because his vocal volume had not elevated a single decibel. A tone that climbs is desperately grasping for its argument. A tone that remains flawlessly level already possesses the argument and is systematically stepping toward the fatal strike. September 11th, 2001, Vance articulated, the date dropping like a lead anvil. I was 17 years old, final year at Middletown High School. He surveyed the Congressional Hall, and for a chilling moment his gaze glazed over, journeying to a morning 24 years in the past that was permanently seared into his memory. I recall precisely where I was standing, period 2, Mrs. Patterson's literature course. An individual sprinted inside and announced a commercial aircraft struck the World Trade Center. We observed the second aircraft hit, broadcasting live on a monitor secured to a trolley in the cafeteria. 17 years of age, his pitch persisted as an absolute monotone, 0 dramatic quivering, merely frigid, exact recollection. The very next dawn, September 12th, 4 of my peers skipped classes and marched directly to the Armed Forces Enlistment Station on Main Street. 4 of them. The morning following, 9 over 11. They walked through those transparent doors and inquired, "Where do I put my signature?" One solitary guy, I declined to utilize his actual name, never returned intact. He operates the ground level at a logistics hub down in my municipality, but he abandoned a massive chunk of his flesh and his spirit on the dusty avenues of Fallujah that he will never retrieve. Vance's stare fastened onto Omar like a concentrated energy beam. That is precisely how Middletown, Ohio responded to September 11th. We rose to the occasion. He permitted the immense weight of that statement to suspend in the atmosphere for 3 excruciating seconds. Congresswoman Omar, during 2019, at a CARE fundraising gathering, you portrayed the tragedies of September 11th in the subsequent manner. He refused to reach for a piece of documentation. Every solitary soul inhaling in that space already recognized the notorious statement. Some individuals did a certain thing. The balcony stirred once more. It was a profound reaction echoing through the space like an abrupt breeze sweeping tall weeds. 3,000 citizens perished, Vance proceeded, his voice transforming into iron. 3,000 courageous rescue workers who rushed up collapsing steps fully aware they might never descend again. Valiant travelers aboard Flight 93 who attacked a cockpit with their naked fists. My companions enlisted in the United States military owing to that horrific dawn. Vance's mandible visibly clenched the involuntary bodily tightening that a male who mastered intense psychological discipline on the harsh yellow markers of Paris Island refuses to ever display unless the foundational sentiment is profoundly authentic. And your summarization of that dawn was a certain thing. He allowed the phrasing to permeate the wood-paneled hall. Those were not arbitrary individuals, Congresswoman. They were coordinated al-Qaeda extremists who savagely slaughtered 3,000 citizens. My peers enlisted to battle and bleed and perish because of that dawn. Several of them genuinely did perish. And you diminished their offering to a certain thing. Omar's rebellious jaw remained hoisted high. Her stance remained stiffly flawless, but her gaze, for the initial time since she had aggressively seized the lectern, flickered. They shifted downward, merely a minute fraction of an angle. It was the exact manner a navigational needle wanders marginally when a potent lodestone is swung nearby. Not sufficient to alter her primary trajectory, but entirely sufficient to bodily demonstrate that the gauge had sensed the concealed energy. Permit me to be truthful regarding an issue, Vance stated. The sentence was his tactical hallmark, the audible snap of the safety disengaging on a firearm. When I authored Hillbilly Elegy, I absorbed severe backlash. Are you aware who chastised me the absolute most? Residents from my own hometown. People from all over Appalachia. They fiercely declared I had aired our soiled garments to the globe. They proclaimed I had informed the affluent tier that my own mother was a tormentor and that our municipality was gradually perishing. He nodded his head deliberately, and they were entirely correct. I genuinely informed the globe about that because it was the unvarnished reality. And I resolutely held then, exactly as I still hold right at this moment, that the singular feasible method to mend a decaying issue is to be savagely truthful regarding it. He shifted the complete mass of his focus back toward Omar. Congresswoman, your demographic, the Somali American populace in Minneapolis, possessed an issue as well, a tremendously massive one. He declined to aggressively tilt forward. He remained anchored precisely where he was, personifying the intimidating posture of a male who harbors zero necessity to bodily advance toward you because his data is already advancing relentlessly in your direction, feeding our future. A national nutrition initiative. Amidst the annual periods of 2020 and 2022, surplus of $250 million was embezzled straight from a system intentionally designed to nourish starving youths, 75 persons formally charged. It stands as the single largest systemic scam incident in national history. He permitted the astounding statistics to wash across the hall. Permit me to illustrate a scene of what $250 million of purloined juvenile nutrition funds resembles. It appears exactly like a philanthropic location on Riverside Avenue that formerly asserted 5,000 portions distributed daily. When national investigators verified, are you aware of how many youths were genuinely present? 0. Not a solitary child. The taxpayer capital flowed straight into overseas luxury automobiles, opulent real estate acquisitions in Kenya, and pricey apartments procured utilizing the exact currency that was intended to purchase a warm supper for a famished 7-year-old. Vance paused. The legislative chamber appeared so tranquil you could perceive the drone of the climate control apparatus. And these were not nameless strangers to your constituency, Congresswoman. Your very own backers operated these fraudulent locations. And when the massive probe ultimately materialized, when National Justice Department showed up insisting to understand why philanthropic sites possessing 0 actual children were fiercely invoicing for thousands of phantom portions you communicated on the official record, he gazed at Omar. Her facial tissues had not flickered, yet her right limb finally slid off the border of the lectern and fell lifeless at her hip. It was an involuntary equilibrium, the subconscious bodily adjustment an individual performs when they perceive the tectonic slabs beneath their souls are fiercely moving. And what exactly did you perform, Congresswoman? You labeled the probe disorder. You declined to label the colossal scam disorder. You labeled the national probe disorder. You openly proclaimed the administration was intentionally assaulting neighborhood groups, the exact same groups illicitly invoicing for phantom youngsters. Vance rotated his head in denial. When my community confronted issues, genuine, agonizing, horrific issues, I documented them with brutal candor. It cost me enduring companionships. But I vocalized the reality because the defenseless individuals enduring those issues warranted the hideous reality tremendously more than I warranted partisan ease. His pitch lowered a tier. When your community confronted the exact identical type of issue, colossal scam, literally snatching nourishment from the jaws of youths, you shielded it. You fiercely assaulted the justice officials attempting to halt it. And the guiltless youths who were supposed to receive nourishment, they are currently still retiring to bed famished. Omar fractionally altered her mass, transferring her equilibrium from her left limb onto her right. It was the microscopic adjustment of a trapped orator modifying her dimensional stance, acutely conscious that the combat area she was commanding had entirely transformed into a quagmire. A couple of tiers behind the lectern, her junior assistant was frantically scribbling something on a canary writing pad. These were not strategic memos to hand to his superior. These were scribbles intended to safeguard his own forthcoming profession. Congresswoman Omar, permit me to be truthful regarding an additional matter. The audible snap of the safety disengaging once more. The parliamentary hall physically braced for collision. I generated my wealth authoring a publication. The economic exchange was immensely transparent. Publication authored, currency exchanged. Entirely public. My income documents remain a subject of open record. When I formally campaigned for the United States Senate, I submitted absolutely every fiscal document mandated by national regulations. Every person is aware of whatever I possess. He fixed his stare upon Omar. Allow us to converse regarding your wealth, Congresswoman. Omar's jaw immediately elevated a fraction of an inch further. When the jaw lifts rapidly, the psychological shielding is secured firmly into position. Your entity, your official FEC registered electoral entity, dispersed an astounding $3.7 million to the E Street Group, a political advisory enterprise. The creator and primary associate of the E Street Group is a male entitled Tim Minette. Vance halted, allowing the moniker to linger. Tim Minette is your spouse. Experiencing the bare truth of it methodically presented on the ground of the United States Senate, uttered via Vance's rigid Midwestern tone, appeared completely distinct than silently reviewing it in a periodical. A male's tone upon the legislative floor functions akin to a massive mallet. $3.7 million of contributed electoral capital deliberately funneled straight into your spouse's personal corporation. The FEC naturally submitted a lawful grievance. Your entity inexplicably repaired its fiscal documents solely following the occurrence. Those freshly repaired documents abruptly revealed massive disbursements which the initial lawful documents entirely omitted, which mathematically demonstrates the initial documents were either deliberately fraudulent or astoundingly incorrect. In any scenario, Congresswoman, that signifies a colossal national complication. He drove forward, and it is not merely the electoral capital, mister. Minette's extensive assortment of alternative commercial ventures, a profitable cannabis enterprise, a vineyard corporation have generated $1.7 million of phantom currency, which probing reporters have frantically attempted to trace. When you operate as an incumbent representative wedded to a male whose personal corporation extracts millions straight from your own electoral fund, Congresswoman, the term for that is not commercial aptitude. The term for that is a trend. Vance declined to pause for her to construct a reply. He nonchalantly flipped a single sheet inside a slender beige folder resting on his desk. And subsequently, naturally, there remains the massive migration inquiry, which I raise at this very instant, not out of animosity, but solely because you chose to introduce the subject of migration during your initial assault against me. He glanced down at her from the platform. There exist highly credible, profoundly investigated allegations that you lawfully wed your own biological brother in 2009 for the explicit, illicit objective of perpetrating migration deception. You have vehemently refuted it. But the sole item of proof which could conclusively validate or invalidate it, your 2009 joint tax files, you have absolutely declined to reveal to the populace. And when Representative Nancy Mace lawfully issued a national subpoena for those precise records in 2025, you instantly combated it in federal tribunal. He shut the beige folder gently. I acquired my wealth composing truthfully regarding my trauma. You acquired yours by covertly funneling electoral capital into your spouse's concealed enterprise. I entirely revealed everything to the populace. You inexplicably repaired your documents solely upon being detected, executing it. That constitutes the disparity. Omar's right limb was presently hanging uncomfortably alongside her waist. Her digits were curled tensely on the premium material of her custom jacket. It was the paralyzed limb of an individual who frantically desires to execute a grand gesture of rebellion, but abruptly lacks any concept of what that gesture ought to even resemble. Vance gradually tilted back into the opulent hide of the presiding officer's seat for the initial time over 20 exhausting minutes. The piercing factual blade was finally placed down on the table. Whatever arrived next was not intended to be data or FEC regulations. It was intended to be something considerably more ancient and considerably more profound. Congresswoman Omar, I wish to express something profoundly intimate to you, and I genuinely hope you will listen to it. His volume decreased drastically. It was the revered pitch of a confidential conversation, totally stripping away the facade of a partisan monologue. I awaken every solitary morning experiencing intense gratitude. Every morning. And I decline to signify grateful in the slick, hollow manner elected officials continuously claim they are grateful. I signify I am authentically, marrow-deep grateful. The exact variety of grateful where you rest awake in beds around 5:00 a.m. Gazing at the ceiling before the buzzer sounds, and you contemplate Mama, who has been deceased for years presently, and you utter the phrase, I appreciate you, audibly to a female who is incapable of even hearing you. The parliamentary hall remained currently, entirely, respectfully silent. I experienced massive appreciation toward the bellowing Marine officer who screamed in my visage for 16 grueling weeks in boot camp, until I ultimately ceased being a terrified, shattered lad from Ohio and commenced being a grown man. I experience appreciation toward my incredible spouse. I experience appreciation toward the exhausted educators at Middletown High School who obstinately declined to forsake me. He glanced toward Omar and his expression cracked, displaying profound, agonizing sorrow. I experience appreciation toward America, not toward a theoretical, flawless concept of America. Toward this authentic, tangible nation, possessing all of its authentic, hemorrhaging imperfections and its authentic, stunning magnificence. The nation that extracted a neglected youth from a narcotic den and permitted him to develop into the Vice President of the United States. That is what I gave back. Absolute thankfulness, every solitary dawn of my existence. He halted, permitting the stillness to expand. Congresswoman Omar. The exact identical nation that literally physically dragged you from a miserable displacement settlement in Kenya, relocated you hither, and granted you absolute citizenship and a profession of immense authority within the American Congress. That nation, the identical nation that hauled me from a narcotic den and provided me the military and this precise seat, that exact nation. He leaned impossibly near to the audio transmitter, his tone a piercing blade of closeness. When was the absolute final time you uttered anything genuinely positive regarding it? The inquiry struck the enormous parliamentary chamber, carrying the echoing conclusiveness of a massive iron chime rung within a vacant cathedral. He refused to request a conditional praise akin to "America is spectacular," however. He merely requested a remark entirely, genuinely positive. When was the final time you stood beside a lectern and uttered anything positive regarding the nation that rescued your existence? Omar remained paralyzed at the stand. Her mouth parted marginally. It was not entirely agape in astonishment, merely the bodily initiation of constructing a syllable. But the syllable never arrived. Because Vance's finishing strike inquiry refused to incorporate intricate migration statutes, it declined to involve concealed judicial files. The inquiry centered on a solitary, simple concept: when? And her intellect, sprinting across decades of partisan discourse, simply proved incapable of locating a moment to cite. 1 heartbeat, 2 heartbeats, 3 heartbeats, 4. The entirety of the parliamentary hall was uniformly tallying without producing a noise. Every solitary soul breathing in that space perceived the crushing mass of the seconds ticking past within their own rib cages. It is the distinct, sickening manner you bodily sense moments elongate whenever an individual is expected to talk, and they cease. Every subsequent second elongated, solidified, and grew infinitely more massive compared to the moment that passed prior to it. 5 heartbeats, 6, 7. Omar's junior assistant entirely ceased scribbling. His premium writing instrument sat flawlessly motionless. 8 heartbeats, 9. Vance executed zero effort to occupy the gaping emptiness. He refused to leap in to salvage her from the degradation. He declined to transition to a fresh subject. He merely rested there in the presiding officer's chair, glaring her down, and delayed. It was the intimidating endurance of a male who had expended his entire existence waiting for matters that held significance and had discovered the agonizing way that pausing never constitutes an indication of frailty. 10 heartbeats. Omar's jaw, the renowned jaw that never lowered for anybody, finally ceased elevating. It rested into a vacant posture that was neither rebellious nor totally defeated. It was the bodily manifestation of an individual who had been posed an astoundingly simple inquiry, scoured the immense echoing archive of her entire partisan profession, and discovered absolutely zero reply. "I utter it every dawn," Vance stated, his volume softly shattering the quiet. "I provide my profound appreciation to the brave warriors who trained me, to the dedicated educators who believed in my potential, to Mama, and to this republic." He gazed across the stunned hall, then at Omar's paralyzed figure. "When was the final occasion you articulated gratitude? Not to your affluent electoral contributors, to the United States, the republic that salvaged both our lives." He halted. "This is what I authentically perceive from your path. It centers wholly upon the currency. Divided loyalty, a charge so offensive your faction condemned it. Specific persons executed a deed regarding the darkest morning in our modern past. depicting pro-Hamas agitators as courageous students. I observe you being ousted from the Foreign Affairs Committee because your colleagues proved unable to trust you. His audio intensity never climbed a fraction, making the moment catastrophic. The brutal realities struck her at standard temperature, immediately inflicting critical injuries. That constitutes your authentic record of appreciation, Congresswoman. That is what you offered the nation that spared you. Currency, divided loyalty, a deed, and an agonizing 10 complete heartbeats of absolute quiet whenever prompted to utter a positive remark. Silence prevailed. Vance delayed 3 additional moments, issuing a measured bob of his head. It was the nod of a man who received his reply, the deafening absence of one. Vance stood up deliberately. A presiding official standing is rare, but this was zero theatrical display. It was a termination, the posture a man assumes whenever a dialogue reaches its ultimate end. Congresswoman Omar, we are both children of the American aspiration. You from a brutal conflict sector, myself from a toxic narcotic den. 2 discarded youths who miraculously survived. He glared downward. The massive distinction is this. I comprehend the aspiration as authentic because I lived it. I comprehend it as imperfect. I comprehend youths in Middletown endure what I endured. Yet the aspiration is authentic. I stand as breathing proof. His mandible clenched for the cameras. You have utilized your entire tenure pretending the aspiration remains fictional. If America authentically possesses the capacity to extract a traumatized Somali refugee and elevate her into a congresswoman, then your lucrative casualty narrative entirely collapses. If America is genuinely magnificent enough to accomplish that, the artificial outrage stops operating. You are unable to concurrently pose as a helpless victim of the republic that rescued you. You can merely remain ungrateful. Omar's gaze flickered anew, not downward this instance. They leaped toward the heavy wooden exit portals. It was merely a microscopic blink, but it was the absolute initial time in the whole 22-minute dialogue that her physical vessel had betrayed a desired route, and that route was outward. I stay profoundly grateful, Congresswoman, and you remain merely enraged. Vance's tone carried the authentic gentleness of a man who detected a shadow within a fellow human that he had intimately observed in his own parent. The venomous, all-consuming anger that originates from an agony that never received gratitude out, never received affection out, and alternatively just rested there decaying until it morphed into authority. And the absolute most tragic aspect of it all is we were both rescued by the exact identical nation. He sat back down. The heavy timber gavel rested unmoving on the presiding official's desk, akin to an abandoned stage accessory. The Parliamentary Assembly remained technically still operating. Yet every solitary inhaling entity in that space recognized that whatever routine legislative action was presented next would serve as a pointless formality. The gathering was concluded. Vance had terminated it. He had finalized it the manner a man concludes a conflict by articulating the most authentic, most undeniable reality in the space and then simply occupying a seat. The parliamentary chamber declined to clap. It remained strictly contrary to regulations, but something vastly more monumental occurred. Lawmakers bodily repositioned in their high chairs, not awkwardly, but resolutely. It was the collective, synchronized movement of authoritative people who had just permanently locked their perspectives regarding a matter they had previously been uncertain about. It was the movement of people who had just observed a man absorb a savage slight, decline to retaliate utilizing an insult, and instead pose an inquiry that functioned as the most catastrophic, unanswerable blow anyone had delivered upon that stage all year. Omar remained paralyzed at the stand for 4 additional agonizing heartbeats. Her document dialogue pages were clutched in her palms. She aligned the pile on the solid rim of the lectern. Strike, strike, 2 crisp, exact strikes. It was the frantic exactness of a female who frantically required her limbs to execute a gesture completely routine because the remainder of her intellect was enduring something she had never encountered in her existence. absorbing a savage public loss without uttering a single syllable in rebuttal. She rotated and marched back toward the observer's gallery portal. Her spine remained stiff, her head covering flawlessly arranged, yet the rhythm of her stride was completely shattered. It was the empty withdrawal of a female who had perceived the immense gravity of that unaddressed inquiry suspending in the atmosphere, trailing her, pursuing her akin to a phantom through the heavy timber portals, chasing her down the masonry corridor and slipping into the idling vehicle that would transport her back to the Capitol complex, where she would shortly barricade herself inside her office and be questioned by 17 screaming journalists, one consecutively after another, the precise identical inquiry Vance had posed, and she would evade replying to a solitary one of them either. The visual recording reached Twitter before Omar even achieved the conclusion of the Capitol corridor. It was not the entire 22-minute exchange. The recording was exactly 63 moments in duration. It commenced precisely at the sentence, "When was the absolute final time you uttered anything genuinely positive regarding it?" And it terminated on "the nation that rescued both of us." 63 seconds of footage. 10 agonizing heartbeats of lifeless silence wedged squarely in the center. It was those 10 heartbeats that completely shattered the digital network. The tag number Omar Silence achieved rank 1 globally within 90 moments of its distribution. The recording accumulated 28 million views in 4 hours. The footage required zero external professional interpretation. The agonizing quiet itself functioned as the flawless breakdown. Fox News took the unprecedented choice to broadcast the unedited 22-minute dialogue during prime hours, comprehending that the stark, brutal tape required zero elaborate broadcast graphics. At CNN, the broadcast was equally catastrophic. Anderson Cooper displayed the recording, pivoting to his panel. A veteran partisan messaging director aggressively initiated her justification. Congresswoman Omar has consistently articulated. She abruptly halted, frantically shuffling her documents on live transmission. The sentence was never completed. The terrified commentator had desperately searched for a citation wherein Omar uttered something entirely positive regarding America, but that precise citation simply declined to exist anywhere. The narrative motif of two refugees immediately dominated the broader domestic dialogue. It was no longer Vance versus Omar or conservative versus progressive. It was a duo of defenseless individuals, both miraculously rescued by the exact identical nation. One articulated, "I offer my appreciation." The counterpart proved unable to even locate the prior instance they possessed the humility to do so. This was legislatively catastrophic because it remained entirely invulnerable to standard political retaliations. The progressive wing was unable to yell bigotry because Vance had courteously and nobly acknowledged Omar's horrifying refugee background. They were unable to scream misogyny because he never a single time referenced her sex. They were unable to assert anti-Islamic prejudice because faith was never mentioned. The singular term appropriately utilized was reality. That reality rested completely undisturbed upon the parliamentary floor for 10 agonizing heartbeats carrying zero response. The consequences arrived with terrifying speed. Omar's defensive staff released a panic statement 3 hours later, calling Vance's speech a hazardous distraction from immigrant struggles. They used hazardous twice, but completely failed to mention America. Twitter fiercely mocked this exact failure, proving Vance's point. Simultaneously, the Federal Election Commission investigation into massive payments to her husband's E Street group accelerated, forcing his firm to sever ties with her campaign. Meanwhile, Nancy Mace's subpoena for Omar's sealed 2009 tax records advanced toward a massive July federal hearing. However, the worst damage was cultural. Two refugees transformed into a lasting national idiom representing genuine gratitude. Vance's question, when was the last occasion, sparked a massive internet trend. Everyday citizens nationwide uploaded videos answering him. A Somali-American paramedic in Ohio went incredibly viral, garnering 11 million views by stating she thanked America just yesterday after saving a patient. Back in Middletown, disabled veteran Tyler Boggs sat on his porch. He was one of those boys who enlisted after September 11th. Limping on joints shattered by Fallujah shrapnel, Tyler watched Vance's broadcast on his cracked phone. Hearing his hometown recognized, Tyler whispered his agreement to the empty street, touched a faded photograph of his younger self in uniform, and limped off to work. 1,000 miles away in Minneapolis, Abdi Farah wiped down his shop counter. Having fled Mogadishu decades ago, Abdi watched the same video. Looking at his welcome sign, Abdi quietly answered Vance's television challenge every morning. She hurled insults. He honored sacrifice. 2 refugees within the same republic. One expressed deep gratitude while the other remained silently unthankful. With July's federal court date looming to expose her sealed financial records, Washington nervously holds its breath. That silence completely shattered the internet, and her upcoming testimony might ruin her partisan empire.